I want to invite all men on a journey that has to do with why you matter. I know we're living in a day when the importance of men has been downgraded, has been reduced, and in some places totally removed. Appropriate masculinity has gone unappreciated and undervalued. But God is calling men to rise to a whole new level. Remember, God asked Adam a fundamental question. Adam, where are you? I like to say, Adam, where you at? Because this whole future of civilization will be keyed in to fulfilling your God-designed, God-created, and God-given role. So men, it's time to rise up. Over the next number of months, we're going to be challenging men to a new level of manhood, personal, family, church, and cultural impact. And when God's men rise up, things are going to change. When we fail to rise up, as the Bible makes clear, things will disintegrate. So join me. Let's go on a journey together and see what happens when kingdom men rise. Every responsible man here ought to have a will. If you are a man and you have a family, you ought to protect their future. And that comes through having a will. A will is a legal document that says that what you have accumulated in your life, this is how you want it passed on to those that you leave behind. To not have a will is to say, I want somebody else to determine where what I have been able to accumulate, the assets of my existence, I want somebody else to determine where they go, how they are distributed, and where they wind up. But a responsible man wants to be ahead of that and make the determination of where their assets are to go. You see, to create a will is saying you are future-minded. You won't always be here. So you're going to be thinking about tomorrow, today, in your financial or asset planning. Unfortunately, what many do not understand is that there are not only wills of physical assets, there are wills of spiritual assets. What you pass on generationally that has spiritual value attached to it. And unfortunately, many men who don't even bother to pass on physical assets refuse to pass on spiritual assets, one or both, because they're not future-minded. And as a result of not being future-minded, there is chaos in the future because there was not clarity set forth in the present. The Bible has a lot to say about legacy, about what is passed on to the next generation and beyond. In fact, Proverbs chapter 13, verse 22 says, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. Translation, a bad man leaves no inheritance to his children's children. So if there is no future planning, you cannot be dubbed a good man. Because a good man is not only thinking about what's happening with him today, but what will happen on a 3-generational level. He's concerned about today, he's concerned about his children, and then he's concerned about his children's children, his grandchildren. So a man who's not three-generationally minded, God says is not a good man because he's not thinking long-term. He may only be thinking about today as though tomorrow will never come. So every man, all of us as Christians, but specifically to men, a good man has to be generationally minded at least 3 generations long for God to call you good. In Judges chapter 2, verse 10, it says that there grew up a generation who did not know Joseph, who did not know his God. And as a result, chaos ensued. And when you read the book of Judges, you have a culture in perpetual chaos because there was a transfer of the spiritual baton that did not occur. In fact, the book of Judges says, and every man did that which was right in his own eyes because there was no king in those days. There was no standard that had been passed on. Today we live in a day of societal chaos. And that chaos can be rooted back to men who refuse to build a spiritual legacy. Men who refuse to man up to God's requirement for biblical manhood. And like it or not, God starts with holding the man responsible for how the legacy works out or does not. God says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He never says, I am the God of Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel. It's not because he's against the women. It's just that the man was responsible. The whole condemnation of the human race is tied to a man. The Bible says, in Adam, all die. Doesn't say in Adam and Eve. Only in Adam, the man, all die. That is because the man was held responsible. So like it or not, want it or not, that's just the way it is. And so we're introduced in this passage of Scripture to a man named Asher. Asher. Let me tell you a little bit about Asher. Verse 30 says, Asher had 4 sons and 1 daughter. Asher was the father of 5 children. And when we end the story of Asher, as you'll see, he comes out pretty good. But he didn't start that way. You see, Asher is the 7th son of Jacob. He is the first son of Zilpah, the 7th son of Jacob. If he's the 7th son of Jacob, that means he's been raised in a dysfunctional family. Because as far as Jacob's family was concerned, Papa was a rolling stone. Wherever he laid his hat was his home. Because Jacob had 12 kids by 4 different women. Jacob created chaos in his family. Asher, the 7th son of Jacob, participated with his brothers in putting Joseph into the pit. So he was part of the conniving group of siblings that wanted to ruin their brother's life. His daddy, Jacob, was known as the trickster or deceiver. He knew how to game. And so he played games all of his life, and that rolled over to his children. So Jacob, the patriarch, created havoc in his family due to his deception. It rubbed off on his boys. His boys destroyed or tried to destroy one of their brothers. He wasn't raised in a good, healthy home environment. It wasn't the kind of environment that would have been inducive to an orderly family structure. There are men here, and since he had a daughter, there are women here who have been raised in dysfunctional families. Well, before you ever get to 1 Chronicles chapter 7, that's Asher. That's his history and his background. It's not a pretty one. It's not to be one to be proud of, but somewhere along the line, there was a transformation that occurred in the life of Asher. Because when we read about him here in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, we're going to give you some good news. So the good news that I want to give all of us here today, especially the men, but the principle applies to all of us, is that your past doesn't have to determine your future. That no matter how messed up your yesterday was, does not have to control what your tomorrow will be like. That you have an option to change your legacy. And that the legacy bequeathed to you does not have to be the legacy you dispense to others. Whether it is your immediate family, whether it's your siblings, or those who come under your influence. Such is the case with the change and transformation that took place in the life of Asher. Well, let's go to verse 40, because we'll see four things of Asher's impact and his legacy that ought to be true of every man and every head of household who is here. All these, verse 40 says, were the sons of Asher, heads of the fathers' houses. Heads of the fathers' houses. His four boys became heads of houses. They became leaders in their family. Head of a house is a leader of a home. Whatever Asher did when he got right, so influenced his four boys that they were able to take up responsible reins in their own families. It says that his sons became heads of households, that is, leaders within their home, that is, they were willing to own the responsibility for the family. The government's not supposed to raise your children. The neighborhood is not supposed to raise your children. The father in the Bible raises the children, Ephesians 6:4. Fathers raise your children. The man has to own it. He raised his sons to be leaders, to be responsible. As one woman said to her husband, if you're not going to wear the pants, then go to my closet and pick out a pair of mine. That is to own the biblical, responsible role of headship. You say, I haven't seen it. I don't know what it looks like. Then like anything you need to know about, you learn it. But what you don't do is ignore it. Because every man has been called, if he has a family, to operate as head, the responsible person in it. Now, that does not mean you're the most gifted. Your wife may have greater leadership skills than you. She may have better organizational skills than you. But that has nothing to do with headship. Headship is not the most skilled person. It's where the buck stops. It's the responsible person. So God has given you the office. While you hold the office, you learn the gifts of those for whom you're responsible, and you maximize those gifts so that your office looks good. Headship is responsibility. Headship also involves direction. It involves direction. Whether it's a president or the head of a company, or the head of a church, or whatever, headship means you are casting a direction so that people know which way we're going. If you're lost and you got folk following you, they're going to be loster. Since they don't know where you're going, they're either going to follow you nowhere or decide they don't want to go nowhere. They'd rather go somewhere, so they create their own vision. To be ahead means that I want to be in close proximity with God so that God can speak to me by his Holy Spirit and give me direction so that those following me will have a place to go. So if God can't give the man clarity, then those following him, Joshua says in Joshua 24:15, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. I'm going to set the spiritual, which is the most important, the foundational, the biblical direction. And what that means is that you're not following the crowd. So you're picking up your cues from him. So Asher recovered in some way, and he raised his sons to be heads of households with fire and vision. If you're going to be the head, you just can't see the acorn. You got to look at the oak. You got to see bigger than what is. Yeah, things are not looking good, but me and God got to get together, and we got to find out how he wants us to fix this, correct this, straighten this, reorient this. Why? Because you just said you the man. You say you the man. Well, if you the man, you got to man up in a responsible biblical way. The second thing we find out about Asher's sons is he calls them choice men. Choice men. That means cream of the crop. Choice men. They weren't run-of-the-mill guys. Somehow in his turnaround, he said, my boys are not going to be like everybody else's sons. My boys are not going to just run with the crowd. I'm going to raise up some excellent choice, cream of the crop boys with one daughter. I'm going to raise them up to be the men that God has created them to be. I'm not going to let them settle. I'm not going to let the boys settle. They're not going to be just like everybody else. They're not going to come in here talking about what my friends say if their friends are wrong. I'm not going to let them hang out with anybody because they're going to be excellent, which means I'm going to give them a standard to shoot for. I ain't going to let social media, I'm not going to let Twitter, I'm not going to let Instagram, I'm not going to let Facebook set my kid's standard. I'm going to raise some choice boys up in here, up in here. There's going to be a divine standard that I give them, that I want to model before them, that I want to teach them, that I want to expose them to. He says his boys became choice boys. High character, high integrity, high standards. The third thing it says about Asher's sons, he speaks in particularly of, he says they were mighty men in verse 40. Mighty men. They were raised to be warriors. Mighty men. Not mediocre men. These are some mighty dudes. They were raised to be warriors. See, you have to understand, we're in spiritual warfare here. We're in a war. You now have to fight for your kids. Well, right now, you and I live in a post-Christian era. It's called postmodernism, where the absolute standards of right and wrong no longer apply. So people are making up their own rules as they go along of what's right and wrong. So you better not just send them out to play with anybody. You do have to watch what they're being taught in school. And so he raised warriors. You've got to go to war. You've got to fight. He says he raised warriors, men who would fight, who would battle for his kids, his family, and who would be willing to take the hit fight for your kids. Fight for the future. Wage spiritual warfare. You take them before the throne of grace. You take them, you have devotions with them. You pray over them. Go to war because the devil is going to war for them. He says he raised his sons to be warriors, to fight for that which was right. And then he says, fourthly, he raised them to be mentors, because he says, heads of the princesses. He raised them to be mentors. You see, a prince is a king in waiting. He says they were heads of princesses. They were raising future kings. He says they were mentored. They were raised as princesses, that is, positioned for future kingship. And so the question is, what level of mentoring are we giving our kids? And remember, to the third generation, our grandkids. Many a young man has been spiritually castrated because he's not been given a sense of his royal standing in the family and, most importantly, with the Lord. They've been duped and ripped because there's no godly male figure who loves God, who loves them, who gives them a biblical worldview, and who spiritually imparts to them so that they take all of God into all of life, into all of their world. But the good news is that God can change your yesterday, no matter how messed up it is, and give you a different tomorrow. I know your daddy wasn't there, or he was a bad daddy that was there. I know you've had bad experiences and you've had sins and rebellion. I know all that, but then all you are is just give yourself a name. Call yourself Asher, because you got some dysfunction in your history. But the good news is he shows up in chapter 7 of 1 Chronicles, a brand new man. So your yesterday doesn't have to control your tomorrow. Because look at how this thing closes. It says at the end of verse 40, and the number of them enrolled by genealogy for service in war was 26,000 men. Oh, wait a minute now. We started off with one man, 4 sons, and 1 daughter. But by the time this man got through, he got 26,000 in his legacy that are ready to go to war. See, you just can't be thinking about you. You got to be thinking about the generations behind you, and you got to build yourself an army of men and women. That meant women were in it because more boys were being born, and so you got to build yourself an army. The problem is Satan has been building his army while God's army has been shrinking. So we got to build an army, 26,000 men. You got to have a bunch of folk who take a stand with God and with one another. So what God is looking for are men who want to recover, men who want to get back the dignity that God created you with, who want to fulfill the role that God has given you. In Super Bowl 43, when Santonio Holmes caught the pass that won the Super Bowl, don't forget, 1 minute earlier, he had dropped the ball. Ben Roethlisberger threw him the ball and he dropped it. But then Ben Roethlisberger called him back and said, I'm going to throw it to you again, and this time don't drop it. So if you've dropped it yesterday, you got kids you don't live with, kids you sired that you don't talk to, grandkids that you don't know, okay, you dropped the ball, but God's ready to throw you another pass. And now you got to be willing to catch the ball and move from here. You say, but I wonder whether it's too late. Well, no, it can't be too late, because in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 21, it says that Jacob, even with his grandchildren, recovered because he blessed his grandchildren while he leaned on his staff just before he died. So if it's too late with your kids, get your grandkids so that you reach them and impact them for time and eternity. God is a generational God. He regularly speaks about one generation to another. He talks about, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He talks about a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. God is a generational God, so men must think and function generationally. It's not just about your life, nor is it just about your children. It also includes your grandchildren. When we do not think about cross-generational impact, we're not thinking about legacy. And if we're not thinking about legacy, that means we don't care about the future. We must make our decisions now in light of the generations to come. When we do that, not only do we give ourselves purpose and dignity and impact, we give our names longevity. Remember, legacy is more than a name. Legacy involves the kind of impact you make in the lives of others in such a way that you inspire them through your legacy to build and transfer their own. Hello everyone, this is Dr. Tony Evans with the Urban Alternative, and I'm excited to welcome you to join us on a journey through Hebrews 11. It's known as the Hall of Faith, where men and women discovered what God can do when God's people learn to live, walk, and act by faith. The beautiful thing is, it's not just about them. It's about us. As the author of Hebrews writes to New Testament believers, and that's who we are, about how the lives of Old Testament saints who learned to live by faith should challenge and affect our lives as we live by faith. So we're excited to welcome you on this journey. It's going to be an exciting trip. We're going to learn a lot. Most importantly, we're going to be transformed by the truth of what it means to be a kingdom hero who lives by faith. When God is ready to give you a new level of experience with Him, it comes with a test. Now, the bad news of a test is that it's a test. The good news of a test is that it's preparation for a higher level. And you can really know when God is ready to really move you to the next level, because it will be a final exam. In other words, it'll be a major test. Now, we get minor tests, little pop quizzes along the way. But then everybody gets hit with that whopper. That test that seems like it'll knock you over. It's a major exam, because God is ready to move you to a major level. So today we want to look at the test of faith. Abraham's, final exam. The author of Hebrews tells us that it came when God asked Abraham to offer up Isaac, which took place in Genesis chapter 22. So what he talks about in Hebrews 11 actually took place in Genesis 22, this final exam. He is told to offer up Isaac, who was the promise. So here's when you know it's a major test, because you're getting ready to have a major promotion to a whole nother level. You know it's a major test when it calls for something significant in your life and at the very same time makes absolutely no sense at all. In Genesis chapter 22, where the story is unfolded for us in that chapter in detail, God tells Abraham these words. He says to Abraham in Genesis chapter 22, now it came about, verse 1, after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. And he said, take now your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on the mountain of which I will tell you. That made no sense. How do you worship God when God is doing a number on you? How do you worship God when he has disappointed you? How do you worship God and go to the altar when you believe he has failed you? God, how do I go to church today? This is, I don't feel like worshiping today. Not in light of what you're asking of me, demanding of me, instructing me, calling me to do. Because what you are asking is too deep. But it says Abraham got up. There's another thing you need to observe. It says, get up and go to the mountain, to the place I will show you. He had to obey without all the details. I will only give you more details when I see you moving. See, one of the reasons that we do not see more details from God is he can't get us to move from where we are. Faith is measured by movement. If there is no movement, there is no faith, no matter how faith-ish you feel. So it says Abraham got up. And now the plot thickens. When he gets up, I want you to keep this verse in mind, verse 4. I'm just going to read it right now. We're going to pick it up in a minute. Verse 4 says, on the third day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. Let me read verse 4 again. Verse 4 says, on the third day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. Somebody say third day. On the third day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. He tells the young men, the servants who help carry the load, y'all stay here. I and the lad will go up and we will worship and return to you. Well, wait a minute now. Abe, God just told you to go kill him. Abe tells the boys, I'm going up here to worship. You boys stay here, me and Isaac. We're going up here to worship. And when we finish our church service, me and the lad will come back. Wait a minute now. God just told you to kill it. Y'all stay here. I'm going up here, take care of what God told me to do. And when I finish what God told me to do, me and the boy will see you afterwards. But God told you to kill it. So what you mean? We coming back to see you afterwards. See, when you're called to faith, you got to speak the truth in the midst of the contradiction of the circumstance. Hebrews 11 says the reason he said that was because he believed God was even able to raise the dead. That's what Hebrews 11 says. So if I obey you, God, and do what you told me to do, and at the same time believe your promise that you're going to work through Isaac to make a great nation, then I also have to believe, since you don't contradict yourself, that if I do what you tell me to do, you got some kind of miracle you're planning to bring me and this boy back here again. But what made him speak that? Where did this faith confidence come that God could raise the dead? Well, you recall, Sarah's womb was dead. And Abraham couldn't function no more at 100 years old. And God created a hookup. And the miracle baby of Isaac was born. He had seen what God could do in raising a womb. So he figured the same God could raise a son. So when God calls you to a major exam, don't forget what he did in the quizzes. Don't forget what he did yesterday when he moves you to a bigger challenge tomorrow. Because if it's bigger today than what he did yesterday, it's because he's moving you to a new grade level, a higher experience with him. And so they make their way to the place that God said. So Abraham now is talking to Isaac. Isaac says to his father, my father, verse 7 of Genesis 22, here I am, my son. He said, behold, I see the fire, I see the wood, but I don't see the lamb. Every other time we went to church, we had a sacrifice. But today, you ain't bring a lamb. What's up, Dad? Dad looks at his son, can't say anything. You know what he says? He says, son, God's got to fix this one. The Lord will provide himself, because I don't have an answer for you. I don't know how this is going to work out. And when God puts you in a final exam, you don't know how this is going to work out. God has got to do something here, because only God has an answer to this dilemma of faith that I'm in. Because this is a midterm or a final. This is not a little pop quiz, and it's confusing. And God's got to provide the solution. And so he takes his son up. He puts him on the altar. Verse 9, he built an altar, arranged the wood, bound his son Isaac, and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Can you imagine what he's thinking, feeling? And Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. Because guess what? That was what he was told to do. Verse 11, but the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, that's Jesus in the Old Testament, the angel of the Lord, Abraham, Abraham. Whenever God calls your name twice. See, when he told him to obey, he only called his name once in verse 1, Abraham. But now in the middle of his crisis, he calls his name twice. That means there's something special coming down the pike. Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here I am. Do not, verse 12, stretch your hand out against the lad and do nothing to him. For now I know you fear me, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Now, I don't know about you, but you should be having a problem right now. And it ought to be a theological problem, because God says, now I know. Oh, wait a minute, you God. You're omniscient. Omniscient means all-knowing. You already knew what I would do, because you're God. You know yesterday, you know today, and you got prophecy down. You know tomorrow. You know where I came from, you know where I am, you know where I'm going. What do you mean you only know this now? And you're an all-knowing God. Come on, with your knowledge base, I could have stayed in bed. We could have skipped all this because you already know. But that's not what God says. He says, now I know. as though I didn't know before. Because I know it, I'm knowing it now. And I only know it now because of what you just did. So how do we theologically bring together the concept of an all-knowing God and a not knowing something till now? How does that work? Well, I want to share with you today something God does not know. While God knows everything actual and everything potential, he does not know everything experiential. For example, if you were to ask God, what does it feel like to commit a sin? I suggest to you he couldn't answer that question because he's never done it. The reason why God became a man in the person of Jesus Christ, according to the book of Hebrews, is that God became a man in the person of Jesus Christ so he could sympathize with our weaknesses, so he could feel what we go through. The Father knows what you go through. Jesus can feel it. So Jesus the Son can explain to God the Father, who already knows the information, what the information feels like, because he became a man. So what then is being said to Abraham at this moment? He is saying, Abraham, now I know you love me because I see it and feel it. In other words, you have now given me the experience of your love, not merely the verbalization of it. Sacrifice your son, the son whom you love, your only begotten son. Do you love me more than him? That's a final exam. When God calls forth a faith act of love so he can feel it. Now I know. Oh yeah, informationally, yes. Intellectually, yeah. But today I feel your love. And I feel it because of your choice of me over the thing you love most in life. What is your Isaac? That thing that God can't have because you're too attached to it. And God says, bring it here. We're talking about the test of faith, and we're not talking about a pop quiz now. We're talking about a final exam. Now I know. And there we have it. Watch this. Then Abraham raised his eyes and looked, verse 13, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for a burnt offering in place of his son. And Abraham called the name of the place Jehovah Jireh. The Lord will provide, as it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it will be provided. That's one of the great names of God in Scripture, Jehovah Jireh. Let me talk to you about the word Jireh, provide. The Hebrew word Jireh means to see beforehand. That's a literal translation of Jireh, to see beforehand. What you get to see in his provision, you get to see it because of what he's already seen in his prevision. So he precedes what you're going to be provided. What you're provided over here when he comes through, he's already seen over here before you get to it. So while Abraham is coming up one side of the mountain, a ram is coming up another side of the mountain. God precedes before he provides. But what he provides, he's already preceded. So you're going to be the surprise one, not him. Because when you're shocked by what he provides, it's only going to come because of what he's preceded. This is the quietest rams in the history of rams caught in a thicket. When a ram is caught in a thicket, it's moving and jerking to get out of being caught. This is the quietest ram in history. The ram is in the vicinity of the sacrifice because it says he looks up and saw the ram. So God keeps the provision quiet, even though he has already made prevision in advance, because he's seen beforehand what he's going to do that you don't see yet. The question, when you face this trial, is how can I move from God's prevision and get a hold of my provision? Until he completed his obedience, prevision didn't become provision. Whatever God is going to do in your life and circumstance, he has already preseen, but you won't see it provided until you have completed what he's asked you to do. Most Christians are part-time saints. They'll do a little something, something and wonder why God hadn't come through yet. But the question is, have you finished what he's asked you to do? So if you take 50 years One of the things you need to know is that your faith will always be tested. The only way you know you have the faith that you want to have or think you have is that you pass the test of faith. And that is when God allows a circumstance to come into your life that forces you to trust Him. So when God puts you in a test, the goal is to pass it, because He does believe in retesting when we fail.